Mini episode 1288 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode 1288. This is FDH managing partner Rick Morris here with my good pal, FDH NBA analyst Ben Chu, and we are breaking down the 2020 NBA Finals, and we have been covering this bubble situation all the way through. We did a bubble sort of preview. We actually did one that was distinct from the start of the resumption, I guess you would say, of the regular season into the playoffs, and then an NBA Finals preview. So we've been charting this step by step. And there was some degree of pessimism from both of us, perhaps more from me, that they would even get to the end of the season. But much like with the NHL, I am very, very happy to swallow my doubts and say that I was proven wrong on this. The bubble was an overwhelming success as far as keeping the coronavirus outside of it. And in the end, we saw an NBA champion. The LA Lakers, their 17th title ever. Yes, that includes the Minneapolis Lakers for all the bitter Boston people out there that want to act like there's an asterisk on it. It's LeBron James's fourth title. It's the Brow's first title. It comes in the year of Kobe Bryant's unfortunate passing, him and his daughter. So there's a lot of different layers to this. And in the end, Ben Chu, this is a situation where you and I said going in, Lakers in 6. But the path from here to there really unfolded in ways I think that were unforeseen. It looked like a blowout at the beginning of the series, and then it got competitive, and the Lakers perhaps were on the ropes if they couldn't win Game 6.
Right, and I think the major thing we discussed earlier, Rick, is that the Lakers were the prohibitive favorites to this. Even Miami had relatively had an easy time winning with the Eastern Conference, getting through the Bucks and getting through the Celtics. It does seem like that the Lakers kind of might have left the foot off the gas in Game 3 that allowed Jimmy Butler to have another one of his brilliant performances for the Heat. But it just felt like to me where that the Lakers were always pretty much in control of the series. And what really kind of hurt the Heat was that a lot they got hit bit by the injury bug early. Bam Adebayo and Goran Dragic didn't play much in the series. Or really beyond at all. And I think the issue is that the Lakers were just we all kind of knew the Lakers were a great team, and before shift to the bubble. People tend to forget they were looking very impressive. They were the overall number 1 seed before pretty much in the Western Conference before any of this COVID-19 stuff was on the radar. They had previously beaten the Milwaukee Bucks in a regular season game of Staples. So it's not really super surprising. I mean, we kind of saw this as a culmination of LeBron being playing well and a lot of the supporting cast just being generally great. And there's not really much you can say. This kind of is just like an open and shut case with the Lakers.
I think so, yeah. And really, again, what they were doing, bringing in Anthony Davis, a lot of turnover in the offseason because a lot of parts were necessary to get him there. And again, moving away from the disastrous year one Magic Johnson approach with LeBron of surrounding him, quote unquote, with playmakers to getting shooters in there like Danny Green and some of these other guys. Really an insta team, much the same as what the Clippers were doing. And I sort of wavered back and forth the whole season between picking the Lakers and the Clippers to come out of the West. We saw in the playoffs here the definitive difference, which is that the Clippers just couldn't find a quote-unquote playoff gear. Paul George really dinging his own reputation in the process by coming up small in a number of games. For Kawhi Leonard, a poor Game 7 against Denver in the conference semifinals. Other than that, he acquitted himself well. And again, maybe we forget just how impressive the Clippers looked in putting away a Dallas team that gave them a lot more headaches than anticipated because Dallas was playing like they were a team ahead of schedule this year. So the fact that you had the Clippers sort of coming up short, living up to the Clipper reputation of not being able to close out in the playoffs. You had Miami coming up small in the Eastern Conference playoffs. I mean, if we'd have known going into the bubble those two things were going to happen, Ben, we'd have all said, yeah, Lakers prohibitive favorite, and the Lakers in the end win with the other two co-favorites on the sidelines at the very end.
Right, and I think just generally with the Lakers is that the team really sort of meshed well together. You have to give Frank Vogel a lot of credit.
Yes.
Earlier in their year, when he was signed as their next coach, a lot of people thought a coup with Jason Kidd would eventually take over at some point, but Vogel stuck to his game plan, made some very smart decisions in Game 6 by starting Alex Caruso over Dwight Howard so that they could play five guys out to defend as much as humanly possible. And it just seems almost like the Lakers kind of did what I thought a lot of teams should go into the bubble. Like, if you already were solidified, your job is to use those couple of seeding games to get stuck for the playoffs. And to be honest, it's not really surprising. The Lakers went 16-5, generally over the series. They trailed only once in the entire playoffs, and that was in the first round against Portland. So, I mean, it really shouldn't be shocking to anyone. AD and LeBron were pretty much dominant this entire time. The Western Conference, I think it was a war of attrition essentially out there, and I'm not really super surprised by any of this. I mean, I don't think anyone should be at this point. The Lakers were a great team in the regular season, and when you have two of the top 10 best players in the league, I would assume you would have a very good chance to win the NBA title.
Yes, and I think perhaps you could say after the way it went through the finals, two of the top 5 players. You and I will be breaking that down not too long from now, going through our annual NBA top 30 list in the league. But I think AD obviously makes a very, very strong case for being in the top 5, even at a time when the top tier of players is more crowded than it generally is, not least of which because of many transcendent performances that we saw during the playoffs. I do know when I make out the annual NBA top 30 list, this will be the first time I put Jimmy Butler on the top tier. I've never had him on the top tier before, but man, he proved he belonged. He stepped up. It was the perfect confluence of player and situation, him being in Miami, fitting with that team there, them sort of building around him, nice complementary parts with Adebayo, Dragic, who unfortunately wasn't available for much of the finals, Adebayo part of the finals as well, Tyler Hero, who looks like he's going to be part of a big three there for a long time to come. What Miami did as far as putting this all together, starting with their centerpiece in Jimmy Butler, is not to be underestimated. One of Pat Riley's best franchise building jobs yet, and that says something. Perhaps Eric Spoelstra's best coaching job yet, and that says something.
And I think the East, regardless, even if they did lose this series in 6, they still did a great job because I think a lot of people after game 1 of the series readily assumed, like I did, that they were pretty much going to either get swept or lose in 5 games.
Me too.
And sadly for them, actually, is that the issue, and I remember we discussed this on the prior episode, was the issue that I felt that they had was that if their offense was not humming, they were not going to beat the Lakers. And essentially their offense was not humming. Losing Dragic early was pretty brutal for them. He did a lot of scoring in the Eastern Conference Finals against Boston and alongside and then series against the Bucks. It just felt like they were almost like in a comparison narrative. It's like after the Lakers beat the Nuggets and they got the trophy, the Western Conference trophy, they looked like they were business as usual, and Miami sort of were like excited and taking photos, and it just felt very stark to me that the Lakers knew that it wasn't done. It felt like the Heat were happy that they were moving forward and celebrating the opportunity. But this doesn't go against the Knicks have a really good young core, and I think in comparison to the Lakers right now, they have a lot of young cheap guys under contract. You have Hero, you have Robinson, you have Kendrick Nunn, who had a couple of good late games in these finals, and you have a lot of pieces that you're going to let go of over time, and you'll be able to get a max roster spot for somebody in the near future. And that team is just going to get better. So you give Miami a lot of credit, give Eric Spoelstra a lot of credit that he was able to get 2 wins out of this Miami Heat team that was clearly overmatched just based on the level of the top 2 players.
They were, and I felt like, again, I agree with you that I thought the Lakers let off at the end of Game 3 a little bit, and I think additionally the end of Game 5. Those were both games where With the Lakers being close, I expected them to put them away, and they didn't in either situation. And some of that, again, owes to the intensity of Jimmy Butler and his just refusal to go down. And this is a thing, and he actually got to show a more multifaceted side of his game in the playoffs, stepping up in terms of the distribution when Goran Dragic went down. For Jimmy Butler to be leading the team in every major category, including assists, he was very LeBron-esque in terms of his all-around game. And again, there are a lot of people that point to this perhaps as when you're talking. Now, again, LeBron doesn't necessarily play a small forward all the time these days, right? When Rondo's not in there, sometimes he'll be an actual point guard. But if you're talking small forward versus small forward, there are a lot of people that are saying this was LeBron's best matchup duel since Paul Pierce back in the day with Boston 2008 and 2010.
Right, and I think Jimmy Butler definitely was able to force LeBron into making some mistakes and to some uncharacteristically weird things that LeBron is not normally used to. But again, it very felt like this didn't feel like a fait accompli at a lot of periods of time. It was intriguing, like people were looking at different matchups and things. And the one thing that just very apparently came out of this was that the Los Angeles Lakers, when you have the top two best players, the big question was who's going to be the third guy. And they ultimately found that they don't need a third guy. You really just need a collection of two or three other guys who need to be the third guy at the end of the day. And you got to just, I think we're going to see possibly barring some, because we know in the NBA, Rick, just because you make it to the final 20 doesn't mean you're automatically back the following year or in future years. But it's going to be very interesting to see how LeBron and this sort of series he had against Miami in the losses, if teams are going to take anything from the defense that Butler played or anything very similar, because moving forward, I think LeBron is very settled for what he wants to be as a player. Assuming most of the LA teams, not the LA teams, but the Lakers players will probably be back next season, and they'll also have a mid-level exception to deal with too. They're just going to get better, and I think the real question is going to be, if you are competing against the Lakers at this point, how do you stop them? And I think right now there's not a lot of options on the table for most teams.
Definitely. And by the way, as a lifelong Cavs fan, I just realized here that I blanked out on the second half of the LeBron-Paul Pierce matchups when LeBron was in Miami and Paul Pierce was in Boston. Those were painful series for me to watch personally. But yeah, the LeBron-Pierce rivalry at small forward, which, again, relatively one-sided if you're talking all-time great players, but just in terms of how they matched up against each other in the playoffs, again, it was close and it was competitive a lot of times. The Lakers team, I do agree with you because there was an article on CBS Sports today about the Lakers being a better team next year potentially, and it's not hard to see why because, again, they didn't have a third part of the big three. Everybody thought it was going to be Kyle Kuzma, although I always wondered how that was going to work in terms of position fits. Because now I didn't anticipate LeBron playing point guard as much as he did, but I'm thinking to myself, LeBron, Kuzma, Davis, that's a lot of guys playing forward on the floor at the same time. I don't think we can blame Kuzma's problems on that necessarily. He's got to step it up if he wants to have a future wearing those colors. But the odds are very good that if it's not him, it'll be somebody else coming in, that they'll be able to continue to upgrade this team. And now you're going to have the ring chasers coming in. I mean, you're going to have the guys like, I'm just going to throw a name out there, Gordon Hayward, like, it would be my great honor to help the Lakers maintain their place at the top of the stack. You're going to have all these guys coming in kissing ass to be part of this thing here. So maybe you get a third piece of the big three that way.
Right. I think those things are the one benefit the Lakers have before is that internally they did a relatively good job of developing a lot of their young talent, especially with the G League team too.
Right.
And I think for the Lakers, just if you look at their roster, they might get a little bit smaller. I mean, the real question I think is ultimately what's going to become of Dwight Howard and Joe Key in the long run. If they use the mid-level exception, are they going to go after a guy who can essentially be a secondary playmaker for LeBron? Are they going to use maybe a big guy, maybe like a Marcus Gasol and Toronto? Or will they maybe go after one of these other guys that was talked about and had a relatively notable game against Denver, Jeremy Grant? And The Lakers played exceptionally well in the finals. You know, you can give credit to KCP, Alex Caruso, and Rajon Rondo had a fantastic game 6 of 21 points, 8 assists, 7 rebounds, 6 steals. Everyone knew their role. They knew how to fit together, and that's always the biggest indicative of a championship. Everyone knows their role. It should be very easy to win. And we also tend to forget one very notable name who wasn't in the bubble. Avery Bradley was a huge part of this team early on in the season, so he's going to be back at some level for the second year, for the next title run. So it's going to be very interesting because they could go many different ways. They're not going to build this team for the future.
Right, and I want to spend a little bit more time here on the Lakers' future. I'm going to circle back around quickly, though. One player that we didn't talk about here, so a side effect of the Lakers winning the title is that the Greek Freak is not the first guy named Antetokounmpo to win an NBA title. Obviously, his brother beats him there first. Didn't have a whole lot to do with it. But you could almost say, even when Pat Riley loses, he wins. Because now you got the Freak looking at that his brother's got a ring. This is a year when he was supposed to at least be in the finals. He wasn't. It's a Miami team that stopped him, that, oh, by the way, is going to have the cap room to go after him next summer. That is going to be something really, really worth watching because I know that you and I have both sold on the potential of him sticking around in Milwaukee past the season.
Well, at this point, too, especially with the Milwaukee Bucks, is that they're going to be a very interesting team to watch for next season. Because essentially, it's very similar to when LeBron left Cleveland for the first time.
Yep.
I have a thinking suspicion Giannis doesn't, if they don't get to the finals next year, he will be gone because there are definitely a bunch of other teams, including the Lakers, who could be interested in his services. And Milwaukee, very sadly for them, is that the coronavirus pandemic has uprooted their perfect sort of legendary season. And you could just tell, like, from the early onset in the bubble, they were never the same team. They were very good, but they were just never the same. They looked like they were sort of in a malaise through most of the bubble, and it was very apparent that in that series against Miami, like, they just got slapped around by Jimmy Butler and that team, the way they were shooting and just playing overall. And it's going to be a real question with how do they make this roster better with their current cap situation and with retaining Mike Budenholzer as the head coach. I think just based on the law of averages, I think Milwaukee is probably going to be the leader in the clubhouse. But again, in comparison to a year ago, they have a lot of teams trying to come just behind them. Toronto nearly made it to Eastern Conference Finals again. The Celtics were pretty much a game or two away from getting to the finals themselves. And I think you'll have a Brooklyn team with a healthy KD and a healthy Kyrie Irving to have to deal with. So again, this arguably was Giannis' best year to prove that he would be this next level player. And while he did win the MVP and a Defensive Player of the Year honor, they came up woefully short.
Well, yeah, and let's not forget just how inexplicable it was. I remember how inexplicable it seemed to me at the time. Now, granted, I was a little slow to catch up to how good Toronto was last year. But last year, dude.
I didn't think it was inexplicable.
Well, last year, them dumping against Toronto, maybe you saw it coming, but them being up 2-0 and then getting swept from that point forward, maybe you thought Toronto could come back, but I guarantee you were in the minority on that one. And it happened, and this is 2 years in a row now. This isn't just once, Ben, this is twice.
Right. And I think the issue for them, too, again, is going to be with how they work with Giannis moving forward. And we'll see what Mike Budenholzer does, because he pretty much, I thought, should have been fired after this season. And I think at this point, if they don't make some wholesale moves to fixing their rotations and maybe getting a little bit more offensive punch at time, or having Giannis do a little bit more on the defensive end, this seems like a team that is going to crater in at the Eastern Conference Finals at this point.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And really, it's a situation where you go back to, again, for the hard feelings that I had when LeBron left the first time. The second time, I kind of saw it coming, and I just shrugged, and I was like, whatever. So, I mean, I'm at the point now, do I begrudge that it was one or whatever? I don't really care. But, like, the first time around, definitely had hard feelings because the Cavs hadn't gotten a title when he was here. And for the hard time that everybody gives Dan Gilbert, it was where I was mad about LeBron going. And the way that it happened was these were all moves he wanted, like getting Larry Hughes here. All of these guys, better go get this guy, better go get that guy. It was a thing where the Cavs had bad contracts but it was all in an effort to appease him. For Milwaukee, it's the opposite. It's the decision to try to stay under the luxury tax in letting Malcolm Brogdon go last summer. You and I joked previously when Milwaukee had a great regular season. I was like, this can't possibly be Malcolm Brogdon Ewing theory. Clearly it wasn't. And again, they made it through the regular season fine, but letting a key guy get away for nothing more than the desire to save some money, say what you will about Dan Gilbert, but that never happened with him. Whatever moves the Cavs ever made were from being too aggressive if they were mistakes, and a lot of times it was too aggressive to try to appease their main guy. For Milwaukee, they cut their throats a year ago letting Brogdon go because the freak can turn back to them and say, hey, you told me you'd give it every chance to win a championship. You'd give it your best chance and not let money be an object, and you clearly let it be.
Right, and I think the issue someone I'll even notice is that Giannis, to be honest, has had more talent at this time than LeBron had during his first stint in Cleveland.
Yes.
So you would think that this sort of a team would have made a bigger sort of push just generally. And I think, and again, this, to defend Milwaukee a little bit, that they really were relying on their home court this year. And with no home court, this looks like a very above average team, but it did not look like a world beating team. Like they kind of looked at one question that I had during the regular season was that they destroyed bad teams, but when they would play a good team every once in a while, they would struggle.
Yeah.
And when you get to the playoffs, as we all know, you're playing good. You're not playing the New York Knicks of the world. You're playing the elite of the elite. And after a while, you have to ask the question, is this team good enough to win in the playoffs? And now 2 years in a row that they've come up short of getting to the final. That starts to, I don't care who you are, if you're mentally tough or not mentally tough, it wears on you as a human being to be in back-to-back scenarios where you think you should be in the finals and you don't get there either time.
Yeah, I mean, so that's one more year of baggage that they have to deal with than the Clippers do, although for the Clippers it's still baggage, and as you and I speak right now, they're still trying to work out what's going to happen with their head coaching situation next year as Doc Rivers is off to Philly, where apparently he will be Glenn Rivers from here on in, since there's only one Doc in Philly. But as far as it goes in that division next year, and I was like half joking with you off air about Lakers-Clippers being a 4-5 in next year's playoffs, that division is going to be so tough. Again, Sacramento, they've clearly plateaued in their development, but Phoenix was looking really good once they got in the bubble, and I, as a Cavs fan, I'm jealous like crazy that they had the opportunity to do that as a young team. The Cavs certainly could have benefited from that. Phoenix is going to be better than they were before they even get into offseason and make any moves potentially, and at the top of the division now, Lakers, Clippers, Golden State in there as Golden State gets their pieces back together. Sans Durant, of course, but the guys who were there for at least the first two runs at the NBA Finals, 1-1 in 2015 and 2016. I will just gravy train as a Cavs fan and note that it was the Cavs that stopped that pour in 2016. But be that as it may, you have a core there.
There's a lot of Cavs gravy training, dear Lord. We've been 3 minutes, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, it's the one Cleveland sports championship in my lifetime that I have to hang my hat on, and I can already.
I'm just making sure for the rest of the world out there.
Yeah, well, and I can practically hear.
Did I fall for it on a Fear the Score podcast?
Yeah. Well, from the next county over from me, I can practically hear FDH Lounge dignitary Anthony Petrone screaming, but what about the Cleveland Force and the Cleveland Crunch? Sorry, not big league professional sports, Anthony Petrone. I felt good when they won their titles back in the day, but indoor soccer doesn't fill anybody with the same joy as does an NBA championship. But be that as it may, you go back to, and really it should be 2011. It's so funny here. We got the Lakers that last won it in 2010. It was the end of the Kobe run, although nobody really saw that happening at the time. 2011, ultimately, I will go to my grave believing Miami should have won, but got overconfident against Dallas, let them back into the series. But from 2012 forward, when you look at that division, you have major representatives of every champion in the league since then, whether it be LeBron, whether it be Kawhi Leonard, whether it be the Splash Brothers. They're all right there in that division. It is going to be incredible intrigue next year at the top of the West. And again, there's going to be a lot of hype around the regular season rankings, who's 1, who's 2, who's 3. You know and I know that really doesn't matter when you get to the playoffs here. As a matter of fact, I don't see any of them being high seeds, 1 or 2 or even potentially 3, because Denver, Utah, and Dallas are going to have easier divisional schedules. But talk about the intrigue of having those 3 teams in that division and sort of the round robin at the top of the Pacific next year, because it's going to be a media circus if nothing else.
Right, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see, because the Lakers are pretty much going to be the Lakers. We'll see if the Clippers make any wholesale changes to who will be the head coach. I'm assuming at this point it's probably going to be Ty Lue, but there are still a lot of names out there that could be available if he chooses to go elsewhere. I mean, we're going to see, because obviously there's going to be a lot of pressure on Kawhi and Paul George to make it work the next season. And the Warriors, I mean, the thing about this last week, we haven't seen a Golden State Warriors game at least now for over, I think at least it's over 150 days now.
Yes.
Since the last Golden Warriors game. And they're going to get their full complement of team players back, and they'll have the overall number 2 pick, whether they keep that pick or they trade that pick and acquire some other talent. It's going to be very interesting to see how they have a reboot for this year, because it's going to be interesting because both Curry and Thompson have been dealing with injuries. Draymond Green not as much from serious injuries. But it's going to be very interesting to see how that team essentially goes out and what they're going to be able to do. But essentially at this point, like I said, I think we discussed this off air, and you mentioned it earlier, the creme de la creme of the conference still is going to be the Lakers, the Clippers, the Nuggets. Dallas, if they can find another piece, they're probably more than a year away. Maybe they're sort of third-ish type guy. We'll see how Utah performs, and then there's still a bunch of other teams we still don't truly know how they're going to play out. Houston is still an intriguing format with Westbrook and James Harden. I mean, you also have to see LKC to run it back, and possibly, we'll see if Chris Paul and another season of that sort of Thunder team. We'll see how impactful they're going to be moving forward. And we still haven't even mentioned Zion and the Pelicans, who didn't really do much in the bubble, but they're going to be much better next season.
They're going to be a lot better. I see them in the playoffs. And here's the thing, too. As much as I got to give you noogies on the whole thing, I give you credit for owning up before. I've always been kind of a Frank Vogel guy. You and I haven't necessarily agreed on this. I give you credit for owning up on that one. But Ricky giveth and Ricky taketh away. I'm going to giveth here as well, Ben, because I'm going to throw something out here where you were incredibly prescient. I'm going to go back to the rookie season of a guy named Donovan Mitchell, where you said at one point the guy seems sort of Jordan-esque to you. And I was like, really? I mean, this guy's been a lot better than we all thought, but really? I mean, I don't think there's anybody at this point that would blink at anybody saying that right now. And you were a minimum of a year ahead of anybody else I ever heard talking about the guy's real potential for greatness. So him alone is going to put Utah in that conversation too, plus whatever else they can do as far as tweaking that roster. I think there is a realization in that organization they have to catch up to Denver in the Northwest.
And the really intriguing part, I think, moving forward for them too, is that they were literally one Mike Conley shot away from beating Denver in that series.
Yes.
We might be talking about a Western Conference final that would have ended up being the Lakers versus Jazz.
Yeah.
Or maybe we think the entire differential, and maybe the Clippers actually made it through at that point. So it's going to be really interesting. I'm not as high on Utah as you are. I do think Mitchell is main strides. He's going to be a fantastic player. I'm just very I'm not sure about them only because it seems like they have a bunch of talented guys, but I think their question is going to be, do they keep Rudy Gobert or do they let Rudy Gobert go? Because I think, weirdly enough, this sort of team doesn't really need a Gobert. And I think they should be playing much higher tempo offense with all the altitude and just everything overall. But it's going to be interesting to see because Gobert is one of the best defensive centers. But we're going to start to see how we on too. There aren't that many great big guys left in the league, including outside of Anthony Davis and Karl Anthony Towns. There's not a lot of great big guys, and I think we're going to see either two shifts. We're either going to see teams try to figure out a way to stop Anthony Davis, or we're going to see teams sort of go all in on small ball, essentially. And it's going to be very interesting to see because I think the way that team building is going to be in the near term, I don't think with just a salary cap, we're going to see high fluctuations in it, especially after the COVID timeline. I guarantee you we're going to see some things we probably wouldn't they're going to schedule everybody, how many road trips a lot of these teams will take, if there's going to be a lot of home and homes moving forward. It's just, there's still a lot of unanswered questions, and I think that's going to carry over.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And again, I think it's a very exciting time in the league because, again, you have the teams that were there at the end this year. But again, we said, you throw in Golden State getting their guys back. You throw in Brooklyn getting their guys back. So a number of big championship-winning players from the 2010s trying to make later career runs for those two teams. Can they elevate them at a time when we've already seen Miami get elevated, Denver to some degree, Dallas is starting the process. Like you said, New Orleans, they come from further back than some of these other teams, but they have the potential to make a bigger jump quicker, potentially because of the star power of some of the players on there. And Brandon Ingram really having a breakthrough type year as well. So again, David Griffin is just a fantastic team builder, as he was with the Cavaliers, putting all the pieces around LeBron. A very exciting time in the league. The last note to talk about here is, in looking at this, in what was a finals coming in where, again, maybe there wasn't a whole lot of intrigue because Miami was a 5 seed. Nobody was really talking about them coming out of the East, whatever. And then you have a blowout in game one. So maybe we never really had the chance for high ratings in this series, but it is still a surprise in a lot of quarters just how low the ratings were. I've seen a lot of gloating. I got a text from a friend of mine today who he was quoting the Washington Examiner. I'm like, that's amazing. You could find an article in the Washington Examiner saying that NBA woke politics is responsible for the low ratings. But I mean, I do think there is something to the notion, though, of the league getting a little bit more in the whole thing of taking sides. You've got Adam Silver already saying we're not going to do that again next year as far as painting stuff on the court and that kind of stuff. So the league, in some small ways, trying to tiptoe away from this. And I think Adam Silver, being the brilliant guy that he is, realizes that the league has to look inclusive, and they want you to watch basketball regardless of what your politics are. But there's a number of different explanations for this that go beyond that. You had one in particular that I find to be very, very unique, and I think it's very compelling.
Right. And I mean, one thing, before I may go into the next point, one of the data points I would read, and I believe that an article by Sport, that the average sort of racial, the average fan base on ethnicity for the NBA during the last two runs of the finals, it was 55% non-white. So there's roughly, you would say, 40 to 45% white people watching the event.
Okay.
I highly doubt that percentage really impacted this in the long run. I'm not saying that there wasn't any sort of an overrun. For me, I think it's a combination of three things, Rick. One, there's just a lot of sports going on. We know that. There was literally a day where the NBA Finals, the MLB playoffs, the NFL were all being played essentially the same week. So you're going to see a fragmentation of all those games over time. Number two, I'll be honest, the Lakers are a great draw. They're one of the legacy franchises in the NBA. But if you kind of look at their numbers over time, when the Lakers have been dominant, those finals have tended to be decreasing. And let's be brutally honest, Miami is a great franchise and a great team, but I think behoove to think many casual observers could name anyone outside of Jimmy Butler on that team.
That's right.
And to be honest, number three, Rick, and to get to the point you were trying to help me lead into, was that I think just the fragmentation of entertainment overall in the COVID-19 timeline is huge. In comparison to last year, which was the Raptors-Warriors finals, which essentially averaged out of 28.8 and 15 million per people, in comparison to like the first three games this year, which essentially, as we have discussed, it is the lowest rated final in history. If we don't, and but sadly we don't have data from the early 70s. We truly do not know at that timeline how bad these ratings truly are. But let's just be honest, everyone has a lot of entertainment options now. And
yes.
Be honest, if we look at 2019, we had, if you were looking at just streaming video on demand content, you only had three things essentially, which was Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu.
In terms of the major services, yes, the majors.
Yeah, the majors. Yeah, excuse me. Thank you for helping me clarify that.
Yeah.
We don't want to piss off the Crackle people. We're always trying to. We always like Crackle. There's nothing wrong. They shouldn't have canceled Sports Jeopardy.
That's right. I like some stuff on Crackle. Yeah, don't we all?
Yeah, but I got other stuff. But what I will say though is that in this current timeline, we've received Disney Plus, HBO Max, Showtime was putting together. Their service was already there, but they were also being more focused on. And then another thing is too is that we also had the debut of Peacock for the Comcast, and now very soon we're gonna have Paramount essentially mixing it with TV and all access. And if I'm being honest, Rick, if you're a casual fan, I'm not really sure if LeBron James and the Lakers is really that big of a draw for you, especially if you've grown up watching the NBA, and especially in this COVID timeline of cord cutting and people wanting to focus on different things. We've never had a timeline, Rick, at least in the common technology like .com era that we exist in these days. We've never had a scenario where we have been bereft of sports for more than 3 months ever.
Right.
And I think that does play in fact, and I think we have other entertainment options now. And I think one of the major things that's going to come out of the COVID-19 pandemic is that people are going to choose to be more singular in their interests because they can be now.
Yes, I would agree with that. And I think additionally, this is a thing where there are so many different aspects of society where we look at it and we say things are not going to go back to where they were before this because of patterns, things discovered during the pandemic. And for the whole thing, for watching on-demand video and having it explode the way that it did during this, and you and I had talked previously about the failures of Quibi during this thing, and that how the hell during a global pandemic do you fail to get your service off the ground when you have the golden opportunity? But people were watching a lot of on-demand stuff more than ever because let's not forget, the end of some of the TV season stuff, right, it never got finished. Some of the shows never got done. You had movies that weren't available that were going to be coming out over the summer. You had people turning to on-demand services and streaming out of necessity. And that's the thing, Ben. When you have people turn to that in greater and greater and greater numbers and reorienting their patterns towards on-demand and streaming, we will never go back to where we were pre that point in time. Streaming will always, from now on, be that much bigger of a competitor to traditional entertainment sources, of which sports is one. And streaming was already big before this, Ben.
Right. One thing I've been just tracking in terms of looking at, because as we know, there's things that I've been focused on learning about, which is obviously the NBA, but also the streaming platform. And I know we're seeing like the least watch finals is working on. I'm going to also defend the league a little bit here on game one. The Lakers absolutely ran up shot over Miami, and I think casual viewers saw that and they're like, well, the series is over.
Right.
When you come on to team plus 20, I think there's not a lot of hope that it's going to be a lot of those teams. And to be brutally honest, Rick, of the 6 games, only game 5 had any real intrigue near the end of it, to be brutally honest.
Right.
And it felt like that even though, and then this is a point that's been made by a lot of people, and I don't know if I bring any analysis or clarity to that, but again, when we think of sports, we think sports is a very communal thing, and right now, community is one of those things that doesn't really exist right now for most of the world.
True.
You're still, we're still in a time, we've moved now into the framework that normalcy is starting to occur in a lot of places, but it's still not 100% yet. You're still seeing people being very hesitant about going out. You're still seeing people who don't really know what they want to do. And you also have people on the other side of the spectrum entirely who do not care at all that we're in a scenario like this. And it just sort of seems like it's the biggest hit I think these leagues took is from the casual viewers. And I think the casual viewers, just because sports wasn't on, they readapted entirely. And they were able to do other things and they had more time to do things. And one of the things I found incredibly interesting throughout this pandemic was the growth of home sales and home entertainment system and just all these other things that people were now able to buy for this. And in a way, if you truly think about it, Rick, if you look at sort of like prestige television on like the big 4 networks, it has been steadily in decline since early 2010.
Yes.
And it should be surprising that these games are not heavily watched because they were competing with other things as well. And regardless of local of the form, because if we've learned anything from history, the NBA didn't completely be the first year that the NBA as an entity did not award a finals champion, which has occurred in baseball and in the National Hockey League. It would be a very black were able to do, but I'm not really super surprised that people were sort of ambivalent, especially after game one. That kind of showed that the Lakers were going to be heavily dominant in the series. Essentially, the comparison I would make, Rick, is that you essentially got you were told there's a piece of birthday cake in front of you, and you'll get to eat the cake, and and you'll just, I get this analogy correct.
Okay.
It's essentially someone's point that there is a piece of birthday cake in front of you. We're going to offer that you have to wait for, or you could have pie right now.
Okay.
Most of the time, most people are not going to want to wait for cake if they can have pie.
Yeah, true. I mean, the proviso in my case is both of those would have to be gluten-free, but that's just me. But regardless, I understand your point. It's a point well taken. And again, you had said that to me off air. I knew we needed to get that on air because it is a side of this discussion that is not much being had. People are looking more at the quote-unquote standard reasons for why the ratings might be down. And again, they've been down in all sports. People who expected that we were going to see
only even the NFL, the time that is the NFL, is basically dealing with racial issues.
Yeah. I mean, and even the NFL, they'd like them to be a little bit better in some instances right now. And the notion of OMG, biggest sports ratings ever when sports started coming back because we were deprived of them for 3+ months, not necessarily the case, not least of which because, they're all coming back at once. So there's the inherent competition of the baseball playoffs, the NFL happening. We're going to be coming up on a weird period of time now where once the baseball playoffs are done, it's just going to be whatever midweek football games we get to tide us over between college and NFL on the weekends. That is going to be weird. It's going to be like a little bit of a flashback to the spring and the early summer. There's going to be nights in November and December when we don't have any big-time pro sports or big-time college sports, and that's going to be weird, although college basketball will be rolling out in some form or fashion. But as we go through, again, this is at the end of our discussion here tonight is a nice sort of segue on what's to come. You and I are going to be looking at the NBA draft subsequently here, the off-season, the way that it unfolds. It's going to be the most unusual off-season that the NBA has had in quite a long period of time here. Take a look at our NBA top 30 list heading into the next season. A lot of things to get to. Always a pleasure, my man. Thank you, Ben Chu, for being here for our 2020 NBA Finals breakdown today.
Well, I appreciate it, Rick. As always, the bubble has finally been completed. Hopefully, the Lakers can put behind on it.
Yeah. Well, stay safe for everybody out in Southern California here as the celebrations continue to unfold. And
to make one more final point, Rick, the world is healing. The Lakers won a title and there was a riot.
Yeah, not the kind of normalcy I was looking for, but we'll take whatever we can get right about now. So, on that note, thank you everybody for tuning in to FDH Lounge Mini episode 1288.